Hey everyone, Daniel here from Team Kuribrohs, and today I wanted to take some time to talk about Sky Striker, both as a deck in the current format, as well as where I can see the deck going in upcoming formats, especially with Mystic Mine after being hit. For the start of this, we're going to go through a deck profile for what I played for my local OTS Championship, which I ended up winning. This deck has also performed well playing at local tournaments, and I'm just going to go through some of my thoughts on the deck and whether or not it is potentially viable in upcoming formats. So let's just hop into the deck. First off, of course, we're playing 3 Sky Striker Ace Ray and 1 Sky Striker Ace Rose. So personally, I've never been that sold on Rose as a card. I think with the current builds, you definitely just play a single copy for linkage. However, I think she is by far the worst striker card that you can be playing. She struggles due to the fact that the opponent can interact with her summon, whereas Ray can guarantee that you will get interlinks, which can then float at least. So yeah, Rose, not super keen on it, only playing the single copy. Ray at 3, definitely optimal in my opinion. Like, you hypothetically could cut the number of Rays you're playing, but the deck does still struggle if you don't find your way into at least one Sky Striker Link monster, so I think 3 is the right number here. Then after that, we move on to the hand traps. I was playing triple DD Crow and triple Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. So Striker has traditionally always been a deck where we're playing a decent number of hand traps. This is because if your opponent sets up a multiple negate board, you can often struggle to interact with them. Additionally, there's just certain kind of rules in each format that require you to have certain hand traps. For example, when Striker first came out, playing cards like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring made a lot of sense because Trickstar Reincarnation was in the format. And so I think DD Crow and Ghost Spell are almost mandatory for decks like Striker to play this format. So DD Crow obviously is one of the most versatile hand traps in the format. There are obviously the Bestials as well. However, the Bestials can struggle more into rogue matchups where DD Crow can still be alive. For example, DD Crow is probably more functional against a deck like Fluunderies because you can at least interrupt the ability of a card like Fluunderies' tree, whereas Bestial cards will just be dead in your hand. Additionally, the Striker deck, in my opinion, kind of struggles to utilize cards like the Bestials terribly well. Again, if you have theory to the contrary, I'm very open to seeing it, but Crow seemed like a very safe option. I hadn't done that much exploration into the deck prior to the event, so was happy to play Crow. It performed well, and again, has application against Sprite, it has application against your elements, etc. Secondly, we have Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion, and Ghost Spell kind of becomes more mandatory because of the fact that Crow is so prevalent in the format. There are certain situations where you need your Ray to remain in your graveyard. Obviously, Called by the Grave is only at 1 in this format, but people are still playing it. Traditionally, Called by the Grave had been a big issue for Ray. So Ghost Spell does double duty, where Ghost Spell is able to interact with your opponent's graveyard shenanigans, while also being able to protect your kind of floating and your win conditions, also protecting Engage from DD Crows is quite nice as well. So I'm quite happy with both of those. I really do rate Bell quite highly for the Striker deck because of what I mentioned with Protection of Ray. So next up, we're going to still have some monsters, which aren't hand traps, and there are some issues here. So I decided to play triple Lava Golem and one Gamasiel. Friends played an OTS Championship in Gamers World the day before the Warchest event, and we're saying that Sprite was the most represented deck. So I figured I want stuff that can play really well into Sprite in Game 1 and is also still applicable in other matchups. So, first obvious issue here, Gamasiel shouldn't be played in this slot. Godarla is strictly better in this format because you need to be able to clear the wind barrier statue. Obviously, you do have cards like Widow Anchor that can blank the barrier statue anyway, but Gameciel is, as such, there's very little reason to justify playing Gameciel over Godarla. So that would be a change that I would be making. Overall, though, the Lava Golems and Kaiju performed really well. Obviously, you have to be careful of the fact that Lava Golem locks you out of your normal summon, which can be somewhat problematic for the striker deck. However, with cards like Linkage, it isn't as much of a problem as it may have been previously. So, particularly, for example, in the finals, I ended up playing against Weather Painter, which is one of the more rogue decks this format, but seems to perform quite well against decks like Tier. If Weather Painter can get a couple of turns into the game, then it basically is guaranteed to win. And Lava Golem is really good at shutting this deck down. Obviously, Striker still really struggles to deal with the opposing back row, and this is something that we saw in past Striker formats where Jamming Waves was only ever really played as a one of and always felt pretty clunky. It was generally more used for dealing with opponents' monsters that couldn't be targeted rather than dealing with opposing back row, because so much of the problematic cards like Imperial Order would be up before Jamming Waves could be active. As for Afterburners, again, there's a lot of decks that Afterburners struggles to resolve against, and often you have to Afterburners your own card. So, yeah, having Lava Golem, which interacts really well against a matchup like Weather Painter, was very fortunate. But yeah, I've played a few other events since then, and Lava Golem has still been performing well. So definitely something that I would consider. If you're not crazy about Lava Golems, then probably some combination of Gameciels and Godarlas, just being able to shut down things like Totally Awesome, Sprite Elf, etc. is very valuable. Now we get to the spell cards. I was playing 2 Widow Anchor. I was playing, 3 Widow Anchor, 2 Linkage. This Linkage I have since bumped up to 3 copies. I just didn't have a 3rd copy on the day. Linkage is obviously absolutely insane if you haven't encountered the card before. As with most of the Sky Striker cards, you can only activate it if you control no monsters in your main monster zone. You can only special summon Sky Striker Ace monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn. And you send one other card you control to the graveyard to special summon a Sky Striker Ace monster from your extra deck to the extra monster zone. And if you have at least 1 light and 1 dark Sky Striker Ace in your graveyard, it gains 1,000 attack. So some of the really nice stuff that Linkage lets you do now is you can do something like activate Widow Anchor, chain Linkage, Linkage send the Widow Anchor as chain link 2, and then if you only had 2 spells in graveyard at the time, now the Widow Anchor does get to take control. Linkage also gives you a combo for 8,000 damage. So again, very versatile, really impactful card. And another great thing with Linkage is a chainable set that you can use if your opponent tries interacting with your back row. That's something that I think is very valuable. Another case that came up was an opponent using Change of Heart on one of my links. And so Linkage meant that I was able to get another link out and maintain the protection from having Ray in the graveyard, which is something that the deck had struggled with in the past. So yeah, Linkage is the reason to be playing the deck at the moment, and obviously a very, very strong card. Then for the rest of the striker spells, we were playing 1 Mobilize Engage, 1 Area 0, 1 Multi-Roll. I was thinking about it, and I don't think I would play more multi-roll even if I had the opportunity to. Multi-roll obviously was a really powerful card when the deck first came out, and it's still very strong. However, the problem is that you can't really afford to play multiple multi-rolls game 1, in my opinion. You also don't need the multi-roll Area 0 interaction as much anymore, because obviously you have cards like Linkage, you have cards like Rose, you have more ways to get into your Ray. But the issue with multi-roll in games 2 and games 3 is the fact that there is significantly more interaction with back row than Striker had previously faced. So yeah, I'm not convinced that multiple multi-rolls would make a difference. Interested to hear your thoughts. Then we're playing 1 Hornet Drone. Again, really strong card. I don't know how mandatory Hornet Drone is anymore. I kind of put it in because it's just a default card in a striker deck. But potentially with Linkage, Rose, and Triple Ray, you may not need Hornet Drones, and maybe this space can be freed up for something that provides more utility or more redundancy. Then was playing one Afterburners. Afterburners also underperformed, but I think that's mostly just due to the matchups that I encountered. Obviously, because Striker has a toolbox nature to the deck, having access to cards like this is very valuable. So I'm not convinced that I would cut Afterburners, but it's definitely on my kind of suspect list and will be reassessed as time goes forward. Then I was playing one Shark Cannon. I've seen people being very high on Shark Cannon and arguing for 2 to 3 copies. I'm not entirely convinced that you can afford to play so many copies of it in the format. Perhaps 2 is correct. However, in matchups where Shark Cannon is bad, when you're already playing cards like DD Crow, it just is quite poor. It's really difficult to kind of improve your situation with it. So yeah, I have mixed feelings on Shark Cannon and definitely more testing in that regard. One copy played well for me and has been performing fine. So far, I've not missed the extra copies, but perhaps with more testing into the format, I might be pushed up to 2. I'm not convinced that I will ever get to 3 unless the deck is strictly go second and kind of link climb to kill your opponent, but I'm not sure that that will be the case. Finally, I have one copy of Sky Striker Mecha Eagle Booster. So the logic on Eagle Booster again comes from the fact that people are main decking spell and trap removal and additionally side decking a lot of spell and trap removal. So with Eagle Booster, there's very few ways to punish you just sitting on an indestructible Shizuku. So you're able to do things like I played against Branded Despia, you're able to just shotgun Eagle Booster in standby phase. This means, so if I go first, I set the Eagle Booster. Their standby phase, they activate Eagle Booster, and that way they can't Albaz, they can't super polymerization, etc. And alternatively, it can interact with cards like Branded in Red. They bring card back, you make one of their guys on the field unaffected, so they can't use it as fusion material. It came up in the Weather Painter matchup where my opponent summoned Snow to get a Weather Painter Speller Trap from deck, and I used Eagle Booster, so Snow got the Speller Trap, was unaffected, and couldn't use the ability that it would have gained. So yeah, I'm quite high on Eagle Booster. I think it performs well and plays to what the deck wants to be doing. Obviously, again, Infinite Impermanence is still seeing play in the format, so being able to protect cards like Kagari can be beneficial. But I think the most value from Eagle Booster is being able to kind of guarantee that you survive a turn so that you can use the resources that you've built up to really push for damage. Then in the non-striker cards, I was playing 2 Triple Tactics Talent. This card underperformed. I'm not sure if it was just a wrong event for it, or if the card is actually worse than I think. It feels like it should be really strong. The draw 2 and the look at the opponent's hands both are very high value abilities. The take control ability is not as valuable in this deck because obviously it's anti-synergistic with a lot of your cards unless you're going to climb immediately. So that is something to be careful of, and it does reduce the value of the card a lot because it means it is worse against established boards. Then 1 reinforcement of the army, obviously just an extra copy of Ray, 1 terraforming. So I'm not sure how much longer terraforming will be in the deck. It depends on whether or not Necro Valley has enough value to be played as a search target, or perhaps there will be other field spells worth considering. But getting a free spell into the graveyard, grabbing area 0, or having something that you can just target with the area if you already have it is decent. Then 1 Called by the Grave, still one of the most insane spell cards ever printed. It's probably worse this format than it has been in a lot of formats, but I find it very hard to cut, again, because a lot of the things Called by the Grave stops are things that are threatening your Ray or your Engage. Then I was playing 1 Change of Heart. This gets replaced with the 3rd copy of Linkage when you have that available. Change of Heart again, underperformed, like I said, with triple tactics. Gaining control of an opponent's monster is not as valuable if you are struggling to take control of it. Or struggling to kind of use your own cards or figuring out what to do with it. You do have to be able to link it away otherwise, or just defeat your opponent that turn. Um, then we were playing 3 Demise of the Land, 3 Mystic Mine. Obviously, Mystic Mine is such a powerful spell card. It interacts very positively with cards like Hayate, so it's kind of hard not to play it. At this event specifically, Mystic Mine didn't actually come up all that much. Generally, it was only holding the board for a turn or two. Demise of the Land did also once or twice grab Area Zero rather than Mystic Mine, which is kind of amusing. But yeah, we didn't actually go to time very often. So the mine win con wasn't that real. And then finally, I was playing Two Pot of Desires. Um, Opponents questioned this when I played it, and I can understand why people might not be crazy about Desires. And obviously, I'm not entirely convinced on it myself. However, I think with how tight the extra deck is at the moment and how powerful the format is, cards like Pot of Prosperity just aren't powerful enough. I want to be able to first have the ability to apply pressure to try and close out the game. And second, just getting the raw card advantage of Desires is very appealing. Not being locked out of drawing with Engage is great. Another important thing with toolbox decks like this is yes, sometimes you banish all of the tools in your toolbox, but until your opponent knows that you don't have them, they still apply soft pressure on the opponent, and the opponent has to play assuming that you do have them. So I think Desires is definitely worth considering. Obviously, there were points where I was siding it out, particularly in grindier control matchups where I'm like, okay, I just need to be able to play a resource game. But Desires is definitely something that I think is worth considering in the deck at the moment as a card advantage option. Then we get onto the extra deck. We're playing the triple Kagari, triple Shizuku, 2 Hayate, and 1 Kaina. I've seen people playing triple Hayate. I'm not entirely convinced on it. I think the problem with playing triple Hayate is that you give up a lot of space in the extra deck. And obviously, you are playing a lot with the Striker Links this format. But yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that you can afford to give up the space. 1 copy of Zeka. This card rarely comes up. It's mostly just I'm going to Widow Anchor your guy, attack you with it and Kagari, and then turn it into Zeka, and then turn Zeka into one of the link ones. I think just 1 copy is fine. Then I was playing 1 IP Masquerena, 1 Dark to Dark Charmer Gloomy, and 1 Nightmare Unicorn. I'm not entirely convinced on any of these particularly. I think Dark is very strong, and being able to climb into Unicorn is quite nice, but they never really came up. And then I was playing 1 Access Code Talker and 1 Avermax. Access Code is your aggro finisher, obviously. Less important now that Linkage exists. So you technically could mess around. I had been trying Topologic Bomber Dragon, but it kind of underperformed, so not entirely sure. And then Avermax is nice, particularly if you need to take your opponent's monsters but can't end the turn that game, or can't end the game that turn. You can make an IP Masquerena, make an Avermax, and then you just have something that's really difficult to deal with that punishes the opponent if they do deal with it. Avermax also came up when I was playing against Cyber Dark Dragons at locals, because you could make Avermax and beat over. They had like just 5,000 attack fusion monster that was unaffected by stuff. Then we have our Sky Striker Ace token from the OTS pack. And then side deck. I was playing triple Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. This card didn't come up because I never went to time in any of the matches. 1 more copy of Gamasiel. Again, this should be a Godarla, but I think having a reasonable number of Kaiju style effects is quite valuable. Next up is somewhat more interesting. we have one Eagle Booster and one Hercules space. The logic on this was, again, I think Eagle Booster is really good if you're expecting to be forced to go first, because it's one of the few cards that you can just activate when you're the only one with cards on the field. The logic on Hercules space is, again, if we are going to play really grindy games, then we actually just have infinite card advantage available through Hercules space, cycling it back with Kagari and just looping that way. Then I was playing 3 back removal, 1 Cosmic, 1 Feather Duster, 1 Lightning Storm. I should be playing triple Lightning Storm in addition to the Feather Duster, but I just haven't picked up copies of it yet. Now that it's cheap, I will do. Very accessible. And then I was playing triple Evenly Matched and triple Infinite Impermanence. I've seen people main decking Infinite Impermanence. I'm really not convinced. There's too much in this format that doesn't care about Infinite Impermanence. One of the reasons why you could kind of get away with playing Infinite Impermanence in past formats in the main deck of Striker was that Impermanence was much higher value. It worked better going first and going second, and I'm just not convinced that that is the case in the current format. I think decks like Branded Despia, for example, even if you Impermanence their Fusion Monster or their Aluber, it doesn't really matter. They have enough redundancy that they still get to do their things. So it's not the same as imperming an Alistair, even though anytime you imperm your opponent's Alistair, they always have the invocation anyway. But yeah, so not convinced on impermanence. Evenly Matched is obviously super strong. However, the lack of battle phase can be an issue. So it's something to be a bit more cautious on, I guess. And I think it's one of the arguments that is pretty strong in favor of Lightning Storm over Evenly Matched. So that's my general deck profile. It was 40 cards. We went 4-0 at the OTS Championships. Round 1, I played against a less experienced player whose deck wasn't very consistent, so they weren't really proper games. So that was a 2-0. Then I played against my teammate Craig, who is playing Fluwanderies. Game 1, he decided to just try and draw into an out to mine, but he couldn't find it before I just pushed for game. And then game 2 was a lot shorter. Game 1 took like 30 minutes, something like that. But yeah, game 2, I managed to just find the win. Round 3, I played against a Branded Despia player. Lava Golem performed quite well. And overall, the deck was like fine into the matchup. There are certain things like Lightning Storm is probably better than Evenly Matched sometimes into that matchup because you're able to just focused get rid of their back row. And then in the final round, I played against Weather Painter, which was actually very close. We went to a game 3, which I won by doing linkage, combo sort of stuff. But yeah, so that's my general deck profile. I'm planning on playing more of Striker going into this Defissure macro format, at least to start out. I am concerned that the format is just going to be kind of tier the decks that play all of the banished stuff and then everything else. And it'll maybe be somewhat rock, paper, scissors in that sort of form. But we'll have to see. But yeah, so there will be more Sky Striker updates as I play with the deck more, and I'll let you know if I think it's viable and if there's any sort of text that you can be looking at, or has the loss of Mystic Mine absolutely destroyed the deck. I'm not convinced that that is the case yet. However, I will update you when I figure it out. So thank you very much for joining and watching. Big shout outs to Kuribrohs, shout outs to Aoife for driving me to all the events and being amazing, and shout outs to you guys for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.